We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
Hold down on the mask, extend the clear tubing, and that's going to activate your flow of oxygen.
Welcome to issue 4 of Stoke Stories. In this issue, we're talking about defining moments. What are these moments? How do people see these moments? How do they interpret them? Are these a series of small moments, or is it a big moment that changes your whole life forever? So we flew out to the D School at Stanford in Palo Alto, and we talked to 7 of our favorite thinkers and doers and creatives. What follows are interviews of all of their defining moments, how they affected their lives, and how those moments sent them down a path that they otherwise would not have been on.
Good afternoon, this is your captain speaking with just a little flight information.
I'm Scott Dorley. I'm the creative director at the Stanford D School. I'm also a dad of 2 girls, a husband.
I am Stacy Gray. I am a mom and a wife and a sister and a daughter and a friend, and I work at the D School at Stanford as the chief of staff.
My name is Doug Dietz. Well, my official title is Innovation Architect.
I'm Catherine. I just made a new title for myself. Do you want to hear about that one? Yeah. I am, let me see if I can remember it, Head of Learning Experience and Design for Executive Education at the D School.
Thomas Both. I'm Thomas Both. I work at the Stanford D School. My primary role is to lead our project fellowship.
So my name is Yusuke. My name is Yusuke. I am part of the design team at GoPro right now.
My name is Carissa Carter. I work here at the D School.
I think a defining moment for me is a time where my awareness aligned with what was happening, and I was able to see something that I wasn't able to see. The reason why the definition of a defining moment as being something that is just my presence aligning with what's happening is that I think defining moments are happening all the time. And they're tiny, they're not, I don't think of any defining moment in my life as like, oh my God, that huge thing happened. I mean, you know, my marriage, the birth of my kids, like those are all definitely defining moments, graduation, all defining moments, but the things I think about on a regular basis are way smaller. The example of the one that kind of got me to Stanford and to the D School, my wife got into grad school on the East Coast, and I grew up on the East Coast. So she's going to grad school on the East Coast. I was working in the film industry in LA, and she grew up in LA. So what we decided to do, since we needed to save money, was we got rid of our apartment. She moved in with my parents, and I moved in with her parents, which is like a sitcom waiting to happen, and it totally was. I was working on a TV show at that time, so I'd work on the show for about 3 months, and then I would go back and hang out with her for 3 months. So when I was back, I had all this time on my hands. And when I have time on my hands, I get curious and I can see things in a different way. And so I'm literally at my parents' house at age 30 or something. I'm in the basement watching Sundance Channel.
Hey Mom! The meatloaf! We want it now!
They're having like a documentary. They used to have a marathon of documentaries on Mondays. And so I'm watching the documentary marathon on Sundance, and this documentary came on that was called An Injury to One. And it was a documentary made by someone in an art school, and they had added in graphics to explain what was going on top of the narrative. I just had this moment of like, wow, designers think totally differently than I was taught, and I need to understand how designers learn. Like in just that moment. And that sent me on literally a 10-year trajectory now. And it was like sitting in my parents' basement at age 30. Should I even talk about that? I feel like I shouldn't talk about it. The importance was not necessarily the thing that was happening in front of me, it was my association with it. So I just had a moment of clarity with something that was totally mundane. The defining moment, that's the cliche defining moment, is Eureka in the bathtub. It was in the bathtub. I think that's what I'm saying, right? It was like he was taking a bath. That's not like a big moment. It's the fact that he was aware at that moment and had been struggling with something and had this clarity. It's how you're thinking is what defines the moment, not necessarily the moment itself to me. Although, I suppose back in the day, taking a bath might have been a big deal. I don't know. maybe that was a big deal.
I had the chance to go be part of the design program here at Stanford. I worked as an engineer, mechanical engineer. I also like to make art and see art. And so then there's this program, which is a joint program between art department and engineering department. I'm like, that's awesome. And it's design. That means design in my mind meant you get to create things. You get to think of stuff to create and make them. I feel like that changed my life. There's also a strange thing, which is also I was going to therapy at the time. They were not unrelated. That program's they've kind of changed it now, but it was sort of a mind fuck. The second year is the thesis project is just so wide open, so just about everybody hits bottom. Once you've gone through that, you realize like you can get through anything, right? Like it's like, fuck, I didn't know what I was doing, and I kind of came out of it, right? So I think the therapy and the design program are related because both were about me, who I was, and my practice and my life. And both those things just got me going in terms of, okay, what do I really want to do? How do I express myself? And so to me, both those things built on each other. So not a moment, but that was kind of a couple of years that changed who I was.
To me, a defining moment is not something that I've ever really experienced in real time. It always comes with reflection and looking back at something that I've experienced or a decision I've made, and then seeing how that shakes down once those wheels are in motion. One that felt very real to me was when I was deciding whether I wanted to kind of go with my training and take a job as a counselor, kind of a crisis responder for students who are in need, versus take a job here at the D School and work on cultivating creative learning experiences for people. And I was offered both jobs on the same day, and it was a Friday. And I really didn't know I just didn't know what to do with myself. And I was talking to my husband about it, and he was like, you should totally do that. You should take the job and learn something new. It's a real opportunity. And so I did. So I felt like in that moment, it felt like there were two different paths, like pretty clearly. It was like, you can go to work and get paid to do this, or you can go to work and get paid to do that. And so it felt very much like a choice. But knowing what I know about myself, I mean, the second that I make a choice, I spend all of my energy deciding why that was the absolute worst choice in the world to make. I feel like when I did make that choice, I listened to my gut a lot more than I usually do. I am a very practical person, and so, like I live in the real world where like people need to go to work, and you need money, and you need to have a schedule that works for you, or whatever the case may be. But this one felt like, I really want this. I just want to try this.
So one defining moment for me that like immediately comes to mind when you say that prompt is, it was about 6-ish years ago, and I was leaving a job. And I was leaving a job, but I didn't know what was next. And I was kind of stewing in all of the emotions around change, right? And around like, I'm setting off into the unknown, and I don't know, is this going to be fruitful for me or not? And so what I ended up doing was I sat down at this coffee shop. I can still feel exactly where I was. It was in Hong Kong. I was on the second floor looking out over this really rainy day street. And I started writing down a series of statements. And all these statements started with the words, I am. And they're all statements about myself and who I wanted to be. So they started with I am. They were things like, I am a famous sneaker designer. I am connected to my closest family and friends. I am well known in my field. I am able to take on the projects that I feel are meaningful. So they were all over the board in terms of what they covered. And some of them were true, and some of them, right, or just aspirational, but it felt important to write them starting with I am. And then I started sorting them and organizing them and bucketing them, because I like making maps and finding patterns and things. And I realized that they fell into 3 main categories. Things that were about creating stuff, things that were about curating and finding my own voice and feeling confident in it, and things that were about conveying or sharing information. And so I made this framework, and there's overlapping circles, etc. And when I did that, it's not like I knew what I was going to do, but I knew I was going to be okay because I had a plan. I wouldn't even call it a plan, right? I had something to look at that was grounding. So for me, like, that defining moment was about like going through all the inner turmoil, the navigating what that ambiguity was, and then when the moment's right to come out of it, you know. And I still go back to that and make sure that I'm filling those buckets the right way. And it's helped me through different defining moments too.
There's so many times, I think, in business, there's so many different kinds of rewards that you can get. Probably for defining moment for me, the one time that I really felt it like really deep. You're gonna get me going. We had just finished install, so I would say our defining moment is customer determines it, not us, not me. We were doing an installation of adventure series, so it was a jungle adventure where we took it was a piece of nuclear medicine equipment, and we were turning it into a jungle theme, and it was our first installation, so it was about halfway installed. The director of radiology, Kathleen, came in, and I'm looking at her, and all of a sudden I see tears coming down her eyes. I'm going, oh my God, because this is like a brand new system, I totally screwed up her system. And then she came up and she gave me a huge hug, and she whispered in my ear, "You don't know what you've done for my kids." So as soon as she said my kids, I realized at that defining moment for me that I did something very special for our customer to help them reframe the whole way that they work with kids in radiology. So for me, the defining experience is really defined by your end user, your end customer, and I think they're the ones that can really determine whether that is or not. And for me, that was my defining moment, and I can bring it back to my memory just like it was yesterday.
I guess the first time I thought about that, I thought about a defining moment being a moment that something changes, something big changes, and you see something differently in a very noticeable way. So I was doing my PhD at Stanford in communication, and I'd kind of like followed my interest into that, just being really interested in social psychology challenges and understanding big questions about how people work and why. Which isn't too different from our work now. But I was doing it in a really different way, right? I was a researcher, I was doing quantitative experimental studies, and I took my first class at the D School as a third-year student. My advisor was strongly wanting me to do more stats classes so I could be a better statistician and running further studies. And I'd heard so much about the D School that I felt if I could get into one of the classes, I'd really want to kind of challenge him on that and say, hey, I want to take some of my time to take this elective here. Lo and behold, I got into a class they called boot camp, a 10-week class, kind of a first dive into design thinking process and experience. And I just fell in love with that class. I loved working with people. It was like the extrovert in me got out for a few quarters, and I just fell in love with that. So the defining moment made me realize my work could look fundamentally different. And I think it maybe even one more notch up in that defining moment was my first experience getting to teach or coach design thinking. I remember like walking home out of that day of coaching completely exhausted. Those days are just in some ways the hardest days of work, but some of the most rewarding days of work. And just telling my parents on the phone home, the walk home, and kind of like teary-eyed doing it, like, I didn't know this is what I really love doing in work. How did I not know this about myself? I've done this long PhD, like I don't want to do that anymore. I finished the PhD, but then I went directly to coaching. So that was the moment where I thought I was going to be a research professor, and I quickly made probably one of the bigger pivots of my life, like with a lot of confidence and not a lot of emotional processing or strife, and just knew that was right.
So I was born and raised in Japan until 18 years old. So Japan is a very homogeneous country, and then and it's a decent education system. So if you're born and raised there, everybody tried to go to Japanese university, work for Japanese companies. During sophomore year, I had an exchange program to go to Australia for just a few weeks. And there's a conversation with host family, and then she asked me, what's your dream? And then with like really broken English, I wanted to explore space, like work for NASA. And then what she said immediately after is, if you have a dream, why don't you pursue it? And if I wanted to work and explore space, that means I should go to NASA. And NASA means the US. US means go to U.S. college, U.S. educated. So I decided to go there. And luckily I ended up getting to American University in the States. And the second moment, defining moment is when I discovered design. So I was good at math, Asian, I guess. And so I went on a track for science track. And I majored aerospace engineering. My roommate was industrial design major, and at the time I didn't know what industrial design was or even design was. In Japan, either you're humanity major or the science major. And if you're science, you become either engineer or doctor. There are only two choices. Right? Sophomore year, my roommate was drawing cards, and then, hey, what are you doing? It's like, oh, I'm doing schoolwork. What is that? Oh, industrial design. And that was like a moment where, wait, so that is what you study, drawing is what you study, and somebody pay you to draw. That is called design. But that little voice, the little voice, that I just can't stop thinking about it. I guess the defining moment that I developed to listen to the little voice or the little feeling of there's something there. It's not something that I have to do immediately, but if that feeling keeps coming back, that's something that I would listen to. And those seem to happen more and more frequently in less life-changing matter. Even just daily interaction, like things that I should say or I shouldn't say, the little things. I started to be in tune with that feeling of do or don't in my little head. I think I used to suppress those little voices because I'm not that person, or it's inappropriate to say I shouldn't raise my hand, I shouldn't stand up, I shouldn't behave differently. Maybe I'm starting to care less about what other people think. Maybe that's why those filters are starting to disappear and go with gut feeling. So those little defining moments that happen twice, that's life-altering experiences, right? Like I left Japan and then I was supposed to do engineering and then design. So I think those are big because I was maybe suppressing those little interests that I had in my head, in me, but I didn't really follow through. But now that I turn it okay, I think it's okay to follow those little things. So now, recently, it's less big defining moment, but those are really important to me to, in a way, to live the life in the fullest way.
And that's a wrap. Thank you guys for tuning in to issue 4 of Stoke Stories. We're going to be back in May with another topic with some of these same interviews. Check the articles on the website. Sign up for the email list if you want to be notified when we release a new issue. And let us know your thoughts. We'd love your feedback. See you next time.
Now back to our show.